I'm delighted to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Jehannine Austin. Dr. Austin is a professor in the UBC Departments of Psychiatry and Medical Genetics. They are also a genetic counselor, and they founded the very first specialist psychiatric genetic counseling service. Dr. Austin's research work involves studying how to improve access to genetic services for people who have historically been marginalized and working to ensure that those services are safe and effective. They are also a member of the College of the Royal Society of Canada, a fellow of the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences, and the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Genetic Counselling. So thank you, Dr. Austin, for taking the time to speak with us today, and I will let you take it from here.
Thank you very much, Nicole, for that lovely introduction. And thank you all for coming. It's lovely to see so many people that I know. I'm amazed that you want to hear me continue ranting about this, given that many of you have heard the rant on a personal level. However, I had advertised this talk for people who are white, who are men, and who are full professors. And I don't actually see any people here who meet those identity sort of designations, which is an interesting observation, which I will unpack a little bit perhaps as we go along. So I wanted to talk about trying to give a practical guide for people who are seeking funding, success in funding competitions. Because funding competitions are increasingly recognizing the importance of EDI in assessing excellence, okay? And so just sort of in acknowledgement of the fact that, as I said, we don't really have a whole lot of white men, full professors here. I do just want to be really clear that for those of you who are here today who have marginalized identities, who hold lower power roles, I'm really grateful for you being here, and I really do hope to do justice to the topic today. But I will largely be talking about things that you've all experienced, and I don't expect to be able to teach you much. It might make you angry, though, to recap some of the things that you've experienced. So it's just a reminder, I guess, to please take care of yourself during this presentation today. So to begin, I would like to start by acknowledging, and it's incredibly relevant to this presentation, that I'm grateful to be able to present today from the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, which, as we all know, includes the Musqueam, the Squamish and the Tsleil-Waututh nations here. So, and again, you know, I know many of you have heard me speak before about this, but as we got going with the pandemic, I remember it became more and more commonplace that people would do land acknowledgements, and it ended up feeling so like performative and perfunctory, and I just felt really ick. And then I found this quote by Naomi Klein. She said, "It's not enough to say that we live on Indigenous land, we have to act as if we do." And so in the absence of having anything better to do, to acknowledge this discomfort that I was feeling, I decided that every time I was going to do a land acknowledgement, or as at a meeting where one was made, I was going to make a contribution to an Indigenous-led or Indigenous-focused charity. And here are some of the ones that I really like on the screen, just in case anybody wants to join me in that today. So quick disclosures, 23andMe have provided consulting services a little while ago. It's not relevant to this presentation. And I am, as you heard in the intro, editor-in-chief of the Journal of Genetic Counselling, also not really relevant in context, but you need to know. So I thought I'd start with some definitions. And again, given the audience here, who's here, these are things that you're mostly going to be familiar with. I really like this little apple tree analogy because you don't really have to read the text. I know it's green on green and you can't really see it, but the pictures, I think, really sort of capture what we're trying to talk about here. So starting off with inequality and then looking at the bottom left, equality? Question mark? No, it isn't. And then top right, equity, people have got like, you know, the same sort of equipment, but there's still a distribution of apples on the tree, which is not even. And then justice, really talking about, you know, trying to redistribute things to ensure that everybody has access to the same kinds of things in a justice-based way. So I'm going to start with a couple of quotes for you because, first of all, I love quotes, especially the top one, but also because this presentation, for those of you who have more powerful identities in this space, might be challenging. Okay, so if there's anybody that feels challenged during this and ends up feeling a bit defensive about things that they might have thought or said or done, this is a quote that I literally live by. Maya Angelou is one of my personal heroes. She said, do the best you can until you know better. Then, when you know better, do better. So this is not about recriminations for the past. This is about what can we do better going forward. Okay. And I'm going to guess that if you're here, you're open to reconsidering things. So you're already 95% of the way there. So that's awesome. The other thing I wanted to share with you is a quote from a white man. This is Warren Buffett, and he says, what the human being is best at doing is interpreting all new information so that their prior conclusions remain intact. And I think this is such a beautiful quote because we are scientists and we seek truth and knowledge and all of these things. And so if that's our motivation, surely we don't want our prior conclusions to remain intact in the face of incontrovertible evidence to the contrary. That's what I'm hoping. So I'm basically asking you that today, if you find yourself feeling defensive, if you find yourself feeling attacked, this is not a personal attack. This is a narrative on our environment. And then think, and try to challenge yourself, I suppose. So that's the mindset I'd like to encourage you to engage with me from today. So let's move on to academia to begin with. In this space, we are taught to value objectivity, right? Reason and all of that kind of thing. We are raised in a lost my words already, positivist or post-positivist tradition. And all that means is that we like to imagine that there is a single objectively definable truth, and all we have to do is count it and measure it, and we can identify that truth. And in that context, there's a bunch of people who have particular identities that are thought of as being the default voices of objectivity and reason. And the qualities that these arbiters of objectivity and reason, cisgender, heterosexual, white, English-speaking, abled men of a higher social class. And what happens is that those people with other identities end up being regarded as biased or less valued in these spaces where we're valuing objectivity. And this gives rise to phenomena known as testimonial injustice and credibility deficit. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what that is. So testimonial injustice is something that happens when the listener discounts the credibility of a speaker's words due to prejudice about their social identity, often associated with all of these qualities that we see in the box on the right here. And so the fewer of these identities that we have, or that we are able to pass for, the harder a time we're going to have with credibility deficit and with succeeding and contributing to our academic systems to our fullest potential. And those of us who pick up on the fact that we have, that others regard us to have credibility deficit because of our marginalized identities, often end up being told or thinking that we have imposter syndrome, because we don't think we're good enough and that we just need to change the way that we think about ourselves. I've come to see this as gaslighting, and I'm going to give you some evidence to support this over the next little bit of this talk. So in the interests of exposing credibility deficit and so on, I'm going to tell you about exactly who I am and my identities. So I'm white, obviously, you can see that. I was raised as a girl and then woman, but I'm actually agender. I'm in a same-sex relationship. I'm a first-generation academic. On my mum's side of the family, I'm the first person to go to university at all. I'm also influenced by my status as someone who lives with psychiatric illness. I have depression, anxiety. I take medication every day. It helps, but I have the things. And I have experience with physical disability. I'm also a first-generation settler on the lands of the Coast Salish peoples, as you've heard. And in terms of the things that matter to me, I'm really motivated to try to leave things in a better state than I found them, hence today's talk. Connect deeply, hence me sharing all of this. And as I said at the beginning, in terms of Maya Angelou's quote, I really do live by this. I want to do the best I can until I know better. And when I know better, I want to do better. And I think it's really important because we were just talking about positivism, post-positivism, objectivity, and so on. We like to imagine that we are rational arbiters of the objective truth. But as humans, we do actually bring our own identities and experiences to everything that we do. It's just a fact that we can't escape. So the reality is that everything we see and experience, we do experience and think about through our own lenses of experience of an identity. So that's why I'm sharing mine with you, so that you know what my lenses are as I'm coming to this presentation. So let's just be super clear. I'm not cis, I'm not het, I am white, I'm English speaking, I'm not abled, I'm not a man, and I'm not of a higher social class, okay? But there's a couple of things extra here that I might pass as being, right? So unless I told you, you wouldn't necessarily know that I'm not cis or that I'm not het, right? You might perceive me to be abled, who knows? And I don't know, I learned that in Canada, any sort of British accent is perceived to be posh. So people think often that I am of a higher societal class than I am. So I get the privilege of that, even though it doesn't reflect who I am. Yeah. So what I wanted to talk about substantively today was to provide you, first of all, with an introduction to the existing problems that exist in academia regarding equity and justice, and then talk a bit about why a diverse and equitable environment matters. I'm going to finish with providing some solutions around how we can create diverse and psychologically safe teams. And I'm going to provide you with some solutions around what can you do to make your research more equitable and just. And just so that you know, this introduction part, this bit here, is going to take a few minutes, and that is on purpose. It's for a couple of reasons. One, it's to convince you that this stuff is real. And two, because if you're going to write a grant that's competitive from an EDI perspective, you're going to need evidence and things like that. So this talk is full of resources. All my slides are referenced. They have QR codes on them. You can use them to go directly to the references that I'm talking about. And I'm also going to share with you a list of clickable links at the end, okay? So, but the first bit's going to take a while on purpose, because if I don't convince you this is real and it matters, then you're not going to want to engage in the solutions. So purposeful. Okay, so let's begin. So I hope that we can all agree that the currency of academia, this environment that we find ourselves in, is papers and grants. We promote and reward people who publish a lot, who publish in prestigious journals in particular, have papers that are highly cited, and who bring in lots of grant money. So it's really worth thinking for a minute about whether everybody in academia has equal opportunity to do those things. Think of the tree analogy I showed you at the beginning. And there's buckets of research on this, and that's what I'm going to share with you. So what we know is that bias against certain types of people in academia starts really early. What you're looking at here, the QR code will take you to a paper that talks about how professors evaluate gender and race stereotypes in postdocs CVs that they're evaluating. So the CVs were exactly identical to each other. They just changed names to sort of, you know, simulate different genders, different races, etc. And what the study found was, in terms of competence and hireability, physics favors men who are Asian and white. Biology favors people who are Asian, doesn't matter about their gender. And in all contexts, women were deemed to be more likable, but certainly not more competent or hireable. So there's that. So that's where we start, and then what happens, all right? If these are the things that we reward, let's look and see if everybody has equal opportunity to do these things, beginning with publishing a lot. So this is a paper that's called Giving and Receiving. The QR code will take you there. And it ends up showing what the press release headline here says: women end up doing the academic housework. And what that means is the grunt service work. I do not mean the prestigious service work, like being a department head or something like that. What I mean is, I will use myself an example. I spend a lot of my time and energy supporting students who've experienced microaggressions in the context of their training program. I spend a lot of time trying to support and mentor marginalized early career faculty members. These are things that I find incredibly rewarding and fulfilling. It allows me to connect with people. I make a difference, but it's not rewarded by the environment in which I'm embedded. It doesn't help me get promoted, right? And so it has a tangible impact on things. However, I am white, right? So things like this, remember all that list of identities that I showed you at the beginning? The fewer of those you pass for, the harder a time you're going to have. So this study shows how these service demands that I was just talking about particularly affect women faculty of colour. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense, because we want to be seen as an institution as diverse and equitable and all of that sort of thing, which means that every committee needs to have, you know, people with marginalized identities on it who are visible, ideally, so that we can all see that we're doing a good job. So that means that if you've got one black woman in a faculty, she's going to find herself invited to be on every single committee in that faculty, which means that she's not got the time to do the research, which is going to get her promoted, right? So, but the work that she is doing is not valued in the same way. All right, so if we're talking about does everybody have the same opportunity to publish a lot, this was another question I had as I was putting together this talk. What happens at peer review? I'm a journal editor, so I'm interested in this stuff. So I looked it up and I found that women's papers tend to spend more time in peer review. I didn't know that. I guess it doesn't really surprise me, but like, yeah, look at the figure. It shows you exactly what's going on. And again, the QR code will take you directly to this paper. So first of all, you've got less time to do research because you're doing more non-glory related service work. And when you are writing papers, they're spending more time in peer review if you're a woman. And so that obviously, if we're rewarding people who publish a lot, you're already starting at a disadvantage. So let's talk about the next one, which was about publishing in prestigious journals. Does everyone have the same opportunity to do that? The very short answer is no. And this QR code will take you to a paper that was published in Nature, a very prestigious journal, as you all know, which showed that women are underrepresented amongst corresponding authors. And what the study found was that papers were submitted at the same rate between the male and female, between men and women genders, and were actually even sent out for a review at the same rate, but they were accepted at different rates. Okay. All right, then. So what about, does everybody have the same opportunity to have papers that are highly cited? Let's look at that. What we know is that when women do publish, they're cited less, okay? When you look at it on a per paper basis, so you've got one paper written by a man, one paper written by a woman, there's mixed evidence of bias. And some of that is because there's different disciplinary norms, like some disciplines are, like genetic counselling, my own, are dominated by women. And so it gets a bit messy if you try and do it that way. So there's another way of doing it, which is per author. So you take a man author and a woman author, and you look at how often their bodies of work are cited by others. And when you look at it this way, women are cited less. Okay. Oh, and the QR code here will take you an absolutely awesome paper, which is a review which summarizes all of the different things I'm talking to you about, including this third one, which is this concept called reference ratio, which is a bit of a nightmare. So I'm going to give you a visual to explain what it is. Okay. So the idea is, if you're going to evaluate a reference ratio, the idea is that if you've got an author list that looks like this, so you've got 5 authors, 3 of them are women, 2 of them are men, right? So that's 60% women, 40% men. If that's what your author list looks like on a paper, we might expect that to be representative of the gender breakdown of the discipline in general, all right? If we make that assumption, then we would expect that the reference list authors will match that demographic breakdown. However, that's not what we tend to find. So we tend to find a preponderance of references in the reference list that are written by men. And the conclusion written by the authors of that paper I just shared the QR code with you for, and this is it again here. The conclusion of the authors of that paper were that reference lists tend to cite more papers by men than expected based on overall authorship proportions. This gender imbalance is largely driven by the citation practices of men and has been getting worse over time. So another way of thinking about generating highly cited papers is to think about, our much lauded, highly cited researchers, right? Which UBC tends to celebrate every time Clarivate comes out with another thing. And I don't know if you've noticed, but I've certainly noticed that every time we're celebrating those things, they tend to be men. So I found this paper which shows that women's share of these highly cited researchers grew from 13.1% in 2014 to 14% in 2021. Woo! to close the gap, women's share of this would need to increase by 100% in health and social sciences, 200% in agriculture, biology, earth and environmental, 300% in math and physics, and 500% in chemistry, computer science and engineering. Okay. I don't know if you're feeling kind of depressed yet, but let me tell you, putting together this talk did not fill me with joy. And I'm also going to point out that this is another way in which I am delivering labor to try and prove to people how marginalized people are marginalized, right? And the people that I hoped would be here, the people that I advertised this talk for, white men who are full professors, they're not here. So yeah. And I want you to remember as well that as I'm talking about, oh, Todd, I'm glad you're here. Thank you, my friend. We do have a white man full professor. Thank you, Todd. Couldn't see you. So I want to remind you all that that these things compound. So the data I'm sharing with you is largely about gender. That's because that's where the most research is done. There's a little bit on race and not much about anything else. But I want you to remember that all of those different aspects of identity marginalization are going to compound things. So let's look then at the piece about, does everybody have the same opportunity to bring in lots of grant money? Sigh. Okay, so this is a paper that was published in The Lancet. Oh, and the other thing I need to tell you about all the papers I'm showing you is that they're all very recent. Most of them are within the last 5 years. That's important for me to tell you because I don't want you to dismiss the evidence I'm sharing as, oh, but that's probably old. We don't do that anymore. That's historical. No, it isn't. We're talking about very recent history here, current knowledge. Okay, so this paper looked at CIHR. There was a natural experiment that happened essentially. So if you recall, CIHR launched a foundation scheme a few years ago, whereby instead of looking at the science of the project to fund, they were looking at the quality of the investigator that was applying. And so what this group of authors did was actually look at success rates across the competitions and found it was 15.8%, just for everybody, doesn't matter what. Oh dear, sorry, excuse me. And then they compared the probability of success between men and women. They found that when you were looking at the project grant competition, which is the one that focuses on the proposed science, women's applications were only 0.9 percentage points less likely to be funded. But when you were looking at the caliber of the principal investigator, i.e. the foundation grants, women were 4 percentage points less likely to get funded. So no, we don't all have the same opportunity to bring in grant funding. And this one is a paper from eLife, again, very recent. This is about race. At NIH, and what it shows, so well, originally there was a study that was done in 2011 which showed that white PIs were 1.7 times more likely to be successful in NIH funding competitions than black PIs. At the time, this finding was like widely publicized and the NIH director was, this is unacceptable. And so the paper that we're looking at right now was performed using data from 2019, and it showed that white PIs are still 1.7 times more likely to be successful than black PIs, i.e. in the 8 intervening years, despite the fact that this is identified as not okay, absolutely nothing changed. So we've already established that if we look at these questions, does everybody have the opportunity to publish a lot? No. Publish in prestigious journals? No. Have papers that are highly cited? No. Bring in grant money? No. So then how does that affect promotion and reward within academic environments? Let's look at that. And let's start with the Canada Excellence Research Chairs. I don't know if anybody else remembers these particular fiascos, but I do. In the first round of competition, there were 19 chairs, all of which were awarded to men. And there was outcry about this. And so the federal body basically threw up their hands and said, it's not our fault. We could only give the chairs to people who were nominated, and the institutions only nominated men. So there were no women to give them to. Not sure if that entirely makes it better, but that was the defense. And so in the second round of competition, there were 28 chairs, one of which went to a woman. Much better. So in the third round of competition, they realized that there was a problem and they started actually doing some stuff to try and remedy it. And if you can see here, it says over 50% of successful candidates in each of these competitions, that's competitions 3 and 4, by the way, self-identified as women, and over 20% self-identified as a member of a visible minority. Great. That feels like we still might have a little bit of work to do there. And then it recognizes that individuals with disabilities or Indigenous peoples remains minimal. So, you know, despite the progress along some axes, not doing well, really. And then I don't know if the rest of you are on social media, but I am for my sins. I am not on Twitter any longer because it's a toxic cesspit. However, this came across the social media platform that I do use this morning, and I'm going to read it for you because it's just so stunning. I've had to read it like 8 times already. Congratulations to our 2024 Medicine Laureate, Victor Ambros. This morning, he celebrated the news of his prize with his colleague and wife, Rosalind Lee, who was also the first author of the 1993 Cell paper cited by the Nobel Committee. Okay, so you can have 3 Nobel... Sorry, go ahead.
I said, you give me chills.
I give myself chills, Amina. So Nobels can have up to 3 winners. There was 2 winners in this category. And so they've literally told on themselves with their own social media stuff. So this is how entrenched it is, how little of a problem we think it is, that this is literally from the Nobel Prize Committee tweeting about what they've done without any shame whatsoever.
Somebody did, Jehannine, somebody did a analysis of the papers related to that topic, and
Yep.
she is the first author on like 90% of them.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Dawn.
But
Anyway.
also that is a problem because she's still working with him and she never got to be the senior author, and she published 90% of the publication. It's been, despite that he's her husband, he's still been the senior author. And in biological sciences, senior author is more important at certain career stage.
Yes, may I just, the Nobel Prize is supposed to be given for the work,
That's
not
right.
for whether you are the senior author or not. Donna Strickland, who was a Nobel laureate, was a grad student when she did the work that got the Nobel Prize. It's not supposed to matter.
Yes.
It's supposed to be who did the work.
Absolutely.
Right. Peeps, I'm going to call time on this because not because it's not important, it is, but I've got lots more to horrify you with before we end. So okay, so I'd like to share this, for example. So that was about awards, right? So how does this affect promotion? Okay, so what we're looking at here is a paper that was published just a couple of months ago, and it's looking at the UK Russell Group universities. And if you don't know, those are the big fancy ones, like the Oxford, Cambridge ones. And anyway, so the first thing I'm going to show you is how it was reported in Times Higher Education. This is what it said in Times Higher Education. Women take 15 more years than men to become professors. It makes it sound like it's women's fault, right? That's how I read this. What the study actually shows is that women face biases when they're going up for promotion, which means that they're unfairly evaluated. So anyway, so yeah, there's that. And then this just came out like literally 2 weeks ago. So as I was preparing for this talk, I had to keep adding things as more evidence was coming out. And basically this shows that minority faculty in the US, and so this is looking at race is an important part of this. And they found that racialized faculty members had their H indices and so on judged a lot more harshly than did their white colleagues. Okay. So not only is your H index going, and I'll talk about what that is in a sec, but not only is your H index going to be lower because of the identities that you hold, because of the things that we just looked at in the previous stuff, whatever your H index is going to be judged more harshly by your colleagues. That's what this is showing. So yeah. So I'm going to take a little, I'm not because my slides aren't moving. Let's take a moment just to talk for a second about what H index is because it matters. It's a metric that's applied to authors, and it's related to how many times the work that you've published has been cited. And just as an example, and this is not a brag, this is not an awesome number. Mine, just for reference, is 40, and I actually have currently 41 papers that have been cited 40 or more times. That's all it means, right? So hopefully, even if this is new to you as a concept, you can see some like really obvious problems with this being a metric. One is that the longer your papers have been around, the more chance there is for them to be cited. So it's just going to increase with age, right? Yeah. But there's also, as we saw earlier, in terms of who gets published in Nature, how long publication times take for blah, 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 all of those things, there's evidence in bias that means that people with gendered or racialized sounding names, those from smaller disciplines like mine, or certain geographical areas because of language, will just have lower H indices. And yet this is the metric that we use to evaluate people. And you may be thinking, no, we don't do that. Amina and I sit together on the Faculty Appointments, Promotion and Tenure Committee. And as we were joking at the beginning before everybody else joined, like, I point this out every single time that we have a Faculty Appointments and Promotion and Tenure Committee meeting. And why do I do that? Well, let me share a bit of my own experience at UBC. So when I applied the first time to be full professor at UBC, I was unsuccessful. And I'm going to share with you some of the direct quotes from my department head letter to me and from the dean of the faculty to me. Concerns about my H index, concerns about the journals I'm publishing in, some of which are not particularly high impact. Although your publications have generated much attention, none of your primary research has appeared in a major journal. I hope I don't need to tell you what's the problem with this stuff right now, okay? Because I've already told you. And then from the Dean of the Faculty of Medicine. Though the absolute number of my publications is reasonable, concerns regarding the impact of my peer-reviewed publications. We'd normally expect to see publications in journals that are more impactful, okay? I'd like to give you some context. At this time, I had a Canada research chair. I was the first genetic counsellor to hold a research faculty appointment in Canada. I had won national and international awards for research, teaching, innovation, and leadership. I'd been invited to speak about my research on 6 continents and generated publications that had changed clinical practice and indeed established a new field of clinical practice. Of course, I said all of this and the stuff that I shared with you earlier on in the talk in my rebuttals, but it didn't make any difference. I had to wait 2 years until I could apply for promotion again. And when I did, I was successful, even though my H index had not changed in any meaningful way. So when to give you a little bit more context here, when I applied the first time, I applied what was deemed to be early. I was eligible for promotion and I was encouraged to go forward by my department heads. But it was not the standard year at which most people go forward. So basically what I'm saying is I wasn't successful the first time, but when I was no longer deemed to be early, even though my H index hadn't changed, I was promoted. So when we wonder why, women take longer to get promoted, like, here's my story. This is my story. So, summary of these systemic inequities in academia. Women do more non-promotable service work, and as authors, they have their papers spend a longer time in peer review. They experience bias that reduces the rate at which they publish in top-tier journals. When they do publish, they're cited less. And as grant applicants or people being considered for awards, they experience bias that reduces their success. And the thing that you need to know is that these issues are not just cumulative. They're not additive. They are compounding. Okay, so I'm going to take a breath. So anyway, in terms of like, why do we need to be thinking about equity and justice in terms of our research and academic environments? This is why. That's why we should think about it from the perspective of what's right to do. Okay. But if you're not convinced by that, or if that it's not sticky enough, let's look at it instead from the perspective of your own self-interest. Like, why is it in your interests personally, no matter who you are, to care about these things and to try to increase these sorts of things in your research? Yeah, thanks, Dawn. Okay, cool. So let me go on. Okay, so let's talk now then about why a diverse and equitable environment matters. Sorry, I've had to provide myself some light relief here because otherwise it was all just too depressing. Okay, because without it, you end up with things like this. You end up with a car manufacturer logo that looks like an IUD, right? You end up with a pool floaty that looks like a sanitary pad. Right, these are real things, by the way, that have been much publicized, right? And so you just know straight away that there was no menstruators involved in designing this pool float. And you certainly know there was nobody with a uterus that was involved in the Tesla logo. And then slightly less amusingly, people with female coded bodies end up dying or being injured more often in car crashes because the dummies that are used in testing are male coded bodies. And you may be thinking, oh, but that was fixed ages ago. No, it wasn't. Look at the date on that article there at the bottom left. It's 2022. Okay, so that we're not talking about ancient history here still, even though this is so shocking and it feels so obvious. Okay. So why, okay, that's lovely, but we're not talking about IUD looking Tesla logos or pool floaties that look like sanitary pads. We're talking about my research team. That's irrelevant. Okay, I got you. Okay. So why do we need diversity in research teams? We need it because if you want to get funding, the funding agencies are increasingly emphasizing that from their perspective, it's necessary to achieve research excellence. And I'm not going to bore you in detail with all of the justification for that they provide. The QR code will take you directly to their justification that they've provided themselves. Okay. So just to give you a little bit of context, I'm CFI advisor for UBC, and some of you, hi Dawn, might have come to the talk I did for CFI applicants the other day about EDI and research. And the reason that I did that was because in this round of competition, for the first time, CFI has included EDI stuff in 4 out of 5 of their evaluation criteria. 4 out of 5. So it's not just like, do you have a diverse team? It's across 4 of the 5 criteria, including research stuff, right? So people are going to have to attend to this. And people were asking me when I was doing the talk, yeah, but we're not going to really be held accountable to that. The reviewers aren't really going to uphold that, are they? Yeah, they are. At least that's the plan. CFI has recruited people to be EDI champions in the review process. Hello, I'm an EDI champion for CFI in their review process. Sorry, my hand can go away now. But you know, so they're trying to actually make this real, something that we can be accountable to, right? But the thing I want to point out is that it's not enough to just have a diverse team, right? If you've got a diverse team and a psychologically unsafe environment, that's not better. So if you've got a diverse team in a psychologically safe environment, let's talk for a moment at least about what some of the benefits of that are. So you end up being able to question biased norms and assumptions and stereotypes. You can expand, because you're doing that, you can expand the applicability of your research findings and new technologies to wider segments of society. You can identify implicit assumptions and mitigate biases related to your research that may otherwise go unnoticed and unchallenged. You can support research outcomes that fairly benefit communities that are most impacted by the research, and you can prevent overgeneralizations of findings that can be harmful or misleading. Right. So just to give you a flavor of what some of the actual benefits might be, that's some of them. I don't know how to lower my hand while I'm still talking. I'm sorry. It's just going to stay there. That's fine. Okay. So then let's talk. So hopefully I've convinced you that this is a problem. And even if you don't care about the justice piece of it, then there's self-interest reasons why you need to be attending to this. That is, if you want to be successful in funding competitions, our culture is shifting. CFI, NSERC, SHERC, etc. are saying, we care about EDI and we're going to evaluate based on that. So if you want to continue to be successful in bringing in money, this is going to have to be something you attend to. So let's talk about some solutions around how do you create a team that is both diverse and psychologically safe. There's resources, there's so many of them. So I'm not even going to talk about them at length. I'm just going to show you the QR codes. And as I said, there's clickable links that I'm going to give to you all at the end. But so this is a brilliant resource for you all about not just how to recruit, but also how to retain people. But the key point really is that I want that you need to be consciously aware that the concept of fit is often used as a rationale for us to choose people who are just like us, right? So beware of that. That's really the most fundamental thing here. There's also the UBC Ready office, which is actually awesome. I didn't know how awesome it was till I was getting ready to do this presentation. And then I went on their website and I found there's so much good stuff. If you want like a 1-page infographic on something, they've got it. If you want to attend a webinar, they've got it. If you want to do a group-based thing, they've got it. Like, you know, they've got it in all sorts of different formats. So whatever would work for you, there's an option there for you. It's awesome. Good work to whoever did that. And then I just want to share an example of my own group. So this is just screenshots from my team's website, and the QR code will take you directly there. There's a couple of things. So you can see front and center, that top left picture is just a screenshot. And that's something that we came up with together to sort of represent the things that matter to us as a group. On the top right, that's our vision and mission. And on the bottom right, that's a tiny snippet of our team culture statement. And for us, this culture statement is not just words on a page. It's something to which we hold each other accountable every day. And it's about, that it's founded on trust, mutual respect, equity, clear, open, honest communication. So we try to take care of each other, and take the approach that we can't do good work unless we're all okay. That's the idea. And you may think, I know that some of you may be thinking, well, that sounds like it's incompatible with what I think excellence looks like. Isn't this just going to take a lot of time if I'm having to sit around and talk to people and make them feel better? Well, I want to challenge that by telling you over the last couple of years, I published a total of 50 papers in 2 years. And I do this. This is not words for me. So I'm going to say that I think when people feel valued and they feel safe and they know that their opinions and such are heard and important, then the work that they do is also awesome. Oh, I see another black cat, Ellie. That's adorable. Dawn, go ahead. Yeah.
Thanks. I always wonder in that context, what you have in that document about dealing with situations where people's opinions are harmful.
Totally. So I'm not going to talk about that actually. I'm going to encourage you to go to the QR code. Let me go back and have a look at the document because it's all in there. Conflict resolution is a really important part of how you create a healthy functioning team, and you have to actually adhere to those ideas, because things like triangulation, so we've got 2 team members bitching to each other about a 3rd team member, absolutely completely destructive. Right. So there's some fundamentals. It really is about respect. And what that means is we approach each other from the assumption that we have positive intent. That's what we ask of each other. That's what we bring. And if that's what we're bringing, then those disagreements can be resolved. There's no malicious intent there. We just have to communicate effectively to make that happen. And that's what we invest time and energy in doing. Thank you for that question. As I said, please go to the QR code there. So just as another tactic for you, so yeah, create a culture statement, create vision and mission statements can be really helpful in helping your group feel cohesive and that there's recourse options for when things go wrong, which as Dawn pointed out, they always will because we're humans and that's what happens. But just as another thing to think about, there's tons of evidence that people who hold marginalized aspects to their identities tend to get mentored but not sponsored. All right. And you may be thinking, what on earth is the difference? It's okay. I got you. So the way that I think about it, and this is thanks to Heather Faust Cummings, she said mentors talk with you. And what she means is that they will talk with you about your career trajectory. They will provide guidance for your decisions and all of that kind of thing, which is awesome. Like mentors, amazing, brilliant. But sponsorship is also brilliant. Sponsors they will talk not just with you, but also about you. And they will talk about you in powerful places. So they will actively connect you to advancement opportunities. So if those of us who hold power in this room today think about who it is when we are in powerful meeting rooms and opportunities are being discussed, and we're saying, I know somebody who would be great for that. Who are the people that you're putting forward? And again, this is, I don't want to make anybody feel defensive. This is just a thing to challenge yourself and reflect on. So let's talk very quickly, so that we still have some time left at the end, about some solutions for conducting your research, okay? So I'm going to give you a couple of resources for reflecting on how you engage in research. I know that many of us are in medicine, and so I had to learn the hard way about how to ask demographic questions. And if I can prevent anybody from going through the mess that I went through, awesome, I'd like to do that. So I've got some resources for you around asking better demographics questions. And then I'd like to end really, I suppose, with thinking about justice-based approaches to citation practices, given everything that I shared with you earlier about how citation practices are biased. So the first thing is about reflecting on your research process, like what you're doing. So this paper is awesome. And yes, it says it's about health policy and systems research. That doesn't really matter. You can apply the concepts in this paper no matter what your field of study is. It really provides questions to think about when you're reflecting on your research practices and processes. Things like, Who is ultimately benefiting from the research that I'm doing? Who's excluded from benefiting? Am I using any default language around race, gender, or geography? Am I using any gendered language? Who was included or excluded from participating? And what was the justification? Is there anything I can feasibly do to increase inclusion? And then asking about like, you know, things like, how am I asking about demographic characteristics? Am I actually asking about race or ethnicity as a surrogate for something else? You know, that kind of thing. And then when we're thinking about analysis, are we grouping demographic variables in such a way that erases the experiences of some populations? For example, we might compare white people to everyone else. And we can make rationalizations for doing that around sample size, etc., yada, yada. But being aware of the consequences of the decisions that we make and the methodological choices that we make, I think is just a really important part of the sort of awareness process here. Sorry, hang on one sec. So I alluded to the fact that I had a very messy start in this. So I'm literally airing my dirty laundry right here, okay? I do not have a QR code to this paper because I don't want you to go and look at it. It's terrible. So it was one of my very, very early pieces of work. And I'm showing you some of, like, there's cut and paste bits from the paper at the bottom. Are you male or female? What is that? And the options I gave people to check was one or the other was male, female. Am I asking about sex or gender? Do you even know what the difference is? Which one do we want to know about in this setting? Who knows? It's all a mystery. Like, I have no idea what this is. And then in my demographics section, I said that all participants, I don't know if you know about the word Caucasian, but if you don't, you should. It comes from a history of anti-Black racism. It's not a word to use. We try to use it sometimes, I think, because we're trying to be polite and be euphemistic about not saying white because that feels like too close to Black and we don't want to be accused of racism. So we try and say Caucasian because it's nice and euphemistic. But no, the history of that word is awful. So yeah, I'm literally sharing this with you because I want you to know that, like, you know, as I said, do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. This is me living that. Okay, don't do this. Do better stuff. And I've got some resources that will help you do better stuff in a sec. So with regards to this question, though, I don't even know what I was collecting data about, like male, female, what the hell is that? And so it made me actually eventually think about what the difference is between sex and gender. And just FYI, in case this isn't something that you're embedded in, sex is a term that relates to biology, physiology. So you can, it's not binary, right? You can measure sex in a whole bunch of different ways, and they don't always necessarily agree with each other, even within the same individual, right? So somebody's chromosomes might not reflect their genitalia, for example. Right? We do have intersex people. Intersex people exist. And, you know, yeah, so these are things that we need to be aware of. So sex is not just a straightforward binary that is measured one way. Okay. So gender is a term relating to a social construct. It's a social identity. So it's this deep psychological sense of gender, which is maybe masculine, feminine, neither in my case, or both. And then gender expression is, so I'm here today, I'm wearing makeup. That's typically coded as a feminine thing to do, but I feel as a human, as an agender person. So you can't necessarily go on how somebody expresses their gender as a proxy for what they feel inside, right? So these are just different nuances that I want you to think about. So anyway, none of these parameters are binary. Various of them may align or not. So you know, we tend to think that female equals woman and male equals man, but those things don't. I mean, I'm living example, right? So I was assigned female sex at birth. I have female body morphology, but I'm agender. I'm not a woman. Right. So these are things that do actually matter, because if we're doing a study about reproductive organs and we want to recruit women, does that mean I can't participate? Because I'm not a woman, but I have a uterus. So can I participate? Who knows? Right. These are just things that we need to think about. So resources, if this is the one thing that you take away, like this is the QR code for you. If you want to ask better questions about demographics, race, ethnicity stuff, and we're not even going to get into what the difference between those things is today, but we can if you want. And then sex, gender, like this is an awesome resource for you. So please make note of that. All right, let's end up quickly with justice-based approaches to citation practices. So we already talked about this, how there's problems with H-index. And so we know that they're biased. We know that they're not objective. We know that the way that we rely on them disadvantages people, which sucks if you don't want to do that. If you don't want to participate in a system that does that, like, that's kind of a not nice thing, really. So that's okay. There's things that you can do. There is, for example, this tool. This will take you to a tool called Gender API, which will allow you to analyze the reference list for any papers that you're writing. Okay. And so then what you can do is you can put in a little paragraph into your papers along the lines of what you see on the screen in front of you, which was shared with me by Tamara Vanderwaal and Danny Bassett, who are members of our community who have been doing this for a while already. But basically what it does is it analyzes the author list that you've got and makes assumptions to generate man, woman, so gender breakdown. It doesn't account for non-binary or agender people like me. So this is a shortcoming, but the idea is that it's trying to do better than what we currently have, right? And the tool also makes approximations based for race, based on names as well. And so again, it's not perfect by any stretch, but it's about trying to advance our thinking and awareness of this stuff so that we can do better. So other things that we can think about in terms of justice-based approaches to citation practices, we can sign on as individuals to the Declaration on Research Assessment. And if you don't know what that is, it's the QR code will take you directly to the DORA webpage. And it's basically an initiative that was started in recognition of all of the things I shared with you earlier about the ways in which bias is built into academia, and therefore the ways in which we evaluate people is not equitable. So you can sign on to DORA as an individual. I have done. Please join me. You can advocate for your institution to sign on too. And I actually just presented to the VPs at the UBC, like institutional level, a couple of weeks ago about why UBC should sign on to DORA. It went well. I don't know what's going to happen. We'll see. And in every and any environment in which you find yourself, be it awards panels, be it grant panels, be it whatever, if people start trying to talk about journal impact factors or H-index, shut that stuff down. But I'm going to say, because again, most of you here are people who do hold marginalized identities in this environment, like, it's not your responsibility to fix this. That's the thing, right? So I have to be kind with myself sometimes. I don't always have the energy or the strength or the perseverance to do it. I really don't. I do it as often as I humanly can, but it does take energy to have these fights with people. But if you have the energy, and especially if you have privileged identities, please join us in trying to make these changes. So just to finish, there is well-established, plentiful evidence that academia is not, in fact, an equitable space. It is not entirely a meritocracy. Surprising, I know. Funding agencies are increasingly requiring attention to EDI in their competitions. So, you know, there's multiple different reasons for trying to build this stuff into your practice. It's the right thing to do, and also self-interest. Both of them can be fulfilled at the same time. Awesome. And the resources I provided for you here can get you started on doing your part to hopefully advocate for justice and to be more successful in funding competitions. And I do have a, so what I'll do actually, I think is, I'll take all of these from the last couple of slides and I will stick them in the chat box and/or circulate them via Nicole to everybody that came. So in case you want, you know, clickable links to any of the references that I cited, or you want the resources, then I've got these little clickable things. But what I'm going to do right now is stop share, and then we can see if anybody wants to express outrage, join me in, commiserate. Oh, hi, Laura. Anything else? Yeah. Questions, comments? Sorry, I had to shut some of you down earlier. Lara, please go ahead.
Yeah, I would just make a comment. So this is something I've been struggling with, thinking about, and thank you so much, Jehannine, for just laying all that out, and equal parts outraged and enthusiastic to go bash heads together. And hopefully I'm in a position that I can start to do that. But I would just share with you, those of you who can kind of fight these fights, that I have recently taken the approach that I refuse to sit on any research team or student committee or committee in general that is not adhering to at least some of these principles. And I don't
Yeah.
care if the work is in humans or animals. And I have had some successes of just saying, well, if you're not going to, for example, collect data on female mice, then I have plenty of other work to do. Thanks very much. I'll not participate in this. And so it's been really interesting, the responses I get. But I feel like there are like small, like, are these microaggressions I'm having against the university? I think they are. But I'm embracing that we can start to push back as a group if we start to.
And no, it's not microaggressions. Let's be really clear about that, Lara.
What is that? I used that term wrong, I know.
No, but it's important because that's the thing. This language gets co-opted and used by people in ways that are aggressive, right? So microaggressions occur when you've got a power dynamic going on, right? So in this situation, yes, you're Lara Boyd, but you are still less powerful than the university in this context. They're your employer. So you literally, it's like anti-white racism. It's not a thing in our context. It can't exist because it requires a power differential. So you can't do microaggressions against UBC.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad. I would not want to, but I would encourage everyone to, exert your influence as you are able to do so at every level possible, because
yes,
I think that's the only way we start to turn this ship somewhat around.
Completely agree.
A little bit better direction.
Yeah. Thank you, Lara. Yeah. Dawn.
Thanks. I have a couple things, and one is with regard to funding applications, and one has to do with letters of recommendation.
Oh, yes.
And how people write about different types of students in their letters. So Jehannine, you can talk about that in a minute. One of my biggest challenges, as you know, in our work, and for those of you who don't know, I'm the Director of Research Development at BC Children's Research Institute, and the other two people from our office, Rosie Toomey and Tamara English, are also on the call. One of our biggest challenges is that there is a misalignment or a different training between the applicants' understanding of EDI or a JEDI or REDI in a grant and what the reviewers actually look at. That's completely different in many, many cases. And one of the situations that we often find ourselves in is that a reviewer wants some sort of metrics about diversity, and yet you are not allowed to do metrics about diversity, because this is not about counting, green ones, orange ones, yellow ones. And so they will take statements about diversity as, well, what's your evidence for that? And instead of looking at the instructions of what you've been asked to submit in terms of
I totally agree.
How you approach diversity, they want numbers. So they want to they almost want to replace H-index and GIFs.
I know.
Diversity index.
I know. Yeah.
And it's very frustrating. Any comments on that?
Yes, I do. The problem is that as humans, we are lazy and we do like to resort to very easy things. And that's what we're doing when we try and count things like that, right? And I have lived this, Dawn, as an applicant for CIHR. I think I've even shared some of the comments that I've got back from reviewers with you because they've been so egregiously wrong on a variety of EDI metrics. Anyway, so I have chosen to step away in large part from any non-powerful roles at CIHR for exactly this reason. It makes my blood boil that I can't do anything about it. So I've accepted a role this time around as SO for one of the peer review committees. And I've done that because I will actually be in a position where I can call people out on this stuff. But I'm not just doing general review anymore. I'm accepting positions where I can make a difference on this stuff, because as an applicant, it's infuriating to get that kind of thing. The reason that I chose to be CFI advisor when I applied, they were like, are you sure you're not applying for the CIHR position? I was like, I am absolutely not. I promise you, I don't want anything to do with that anymore. Thank you. The reason that I wanted to work with CFI is because they're trying really hard to be meaningful about this. So as I said, the criteria for the competition this time round have EDI very much built into them, and there are teeth to it, Dawn, this time. So as I said, they've recruited CFI champions who will be sitting on the peer review committees, whose job it is to call out this kind of thing. And I am one of them, and I will do that. And I know the other people that they've recruited are as voicey as me. So I think that it's what we're seeing is that this is the thin end of the wedge, if you like. This is the start of a culture shift in terms of how these things are evaluated. Because signing on to DORA in and of itself doesn't mean anything if you don't change your practices.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, what we're starting to see. We've got the DORA signatory thing going on, and now we're starting to see the how that's actually going to roll out, rather than it just being performative words.
So
Yeah.
with the, sorry, without derailing this whole thing, can I just ask a quick question about the CFI review? And as an EDI champion, you'll be on the MAC, I'm assuming.
Yeah, correct.
But will you read the whole proposal, and will you also rebut what an expert reviewer says about it?
So we haven't met yet as a group of EDI experts, but what I was doing in the last competition when I was in this role was reading the one section where EDI was important last time round, and I was calling shit out under those circumstances. I like, we're recording this, we're going to put it on the internet, and I can't say, you know, I can't speak for CFI, so I'm gonna defer that question, Dawn, I'm afraid. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. What else, people?
Hi, this is Catherine. Sorry to be a disembodied voice, but
Okay.
I'm not super prepared visually to show you my face. But I just want to say, Jehannine, I have to fangirl for a second. I'm also a genetic counselor, so you are like rock star in my eyes. I just wanted to touch really quick on something that you said in the beginning, just trying to find my note, talking about women versus men and how many are getting published. And what the thought that I had was, is there a difference in writing style? I know that when I'm reading like my husband's work, he writes very differently from when I do. And so thinking about writing grants, you're shaking your head. So I'm assuming that's probably something I need to be cognizant of.
So I'm nodding my head vigorously, because actually that QR code that I put on the slide where I said that women's papers spend longer in peer review, that same study showed, so they looked at it from a linguistics perspective. Do you want to know how many rabbit holes I went down preparing this talk? They looked at things from a linguistics perspective, and they found that women's writing improved over time. And what they mean by, whereas men's didn't. And what they meant by that is that it becomes more accessible, understandable, succinct, concise, accurate, whereas men's is just so we. And I'm going to put myself in the we category here, even though I don't identify as a woman, because that's still my experience in the world. That's how people react to me. So we go through the urge to swear really badly is huge. This is going to be on YouTube, so no. We get put through the ringer in terms of the peer review process, and so as a result, we become experts in our craft. So the answer is yes, Catherine, but it's not that men write better than women do. That's not it. It's in fact, by linguistic standards, women end up writing better over the course of their career than men do. So there you go.
But as far as being successful in the writing, in the peer review process, should I then consider, like you're saying, like be more succinct, use stronger vocabulary?
Catherine, I'm going to stop you right now, and I'm going to remind you that if your name is on that grant, you're screwed, because your name is Catherine.
Yeah, it's
right.
Yeah.
Because remember that the very first piece of evidence I showed you was exactly the same CV, where the only thing that had changed on it was names, and people evaluated it differently based on gender and based on race, inferred from the name. So no, this is not I know it's frustrating that we want to be able to fix this ourselves. We want to think, well, we're shit, so we need to do better. But that's not the point of this talk. The point of this talk is to try and undo the gaslighting that we've all experienced about how we just suffer with imposter syndrome as individuals, and we just need to believe in ourselves more and sit at the table. That's gaslighting, because what we're doing is we're actually picking up and acknowledging the ways in which we have credibility deficit in the eyes of the people that are listening to us, right? That's why nobody's here today. Thank you, Todd, apart from Todd. Do you know what I mean? So this is not about what can we do as individuals to make ourselves more palatable. This is about collective action to try and change, our system so that it's a more equitable place.
So use my voice. It's my voice, own it. And that's how I'm going to write it. And if people don't like it, just keep trying.
That's the thing in the end. Yeah, you can't be evaluated as a man unless you're prepared to change your name and your history.
No.
Yeah.
No, I don't think I am.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. Dawn, please, I see your hand up.
I just wanted to follow up on that one. There's two things. One is that writing a paper, a publication, and a grant, those are different writing styles altogether.
Yeah.
And so I don't think one can merge data from the two
No,
things
that's a
because
fair
they are
point, Dawn.
very
That's a
different
fair
writing
point.
styles.
Yeah, yeah.
Secondly, one of the things we have started, or at least I've started doing in grants, is taking first names out altogether and just putting initials.
Yeah.
So
thank you for calling me out on that, Dawn. In terms of, you're right, papers and grants are different things. And Catherine, you were talking about grants and I responded about papers, but then I'm just going to bring you back to the evidence that I showed you about grants. I've got that too, right? There was the CIHR funding paper that I shared, which shows again that it's like, if you're evaluating the applicant, which is and even if you're evaluating the project, women still get funded less than men. So yeah.
Absolutely. So one of the ways we try to combat this is people's unconscious bias about names, and just take first names out everywhere you possibly can.
Yeah. Thanks, Dawn.
Great.
Lara,
Thank
I see
you.
your hand up again.
Well, I'm going to push back on you on that grant thing a tiny bit, just because I spent 6 years screaming at people at CIHR about this, because I was the health research advisor and on the executive committee at CIHR for a long time. And I take great personal pride in helping to destroy the foundation grant because it was so amazingly biased. It was obvious from the first rounds. And so that Whitman paper was actually something that we helped push through to get the funding on.
Amazing.
But I would, just so that not everybody goes home, feeling just beyond depressed, that when, at least at CIHR, that's the only context I know the data well on, but when it is the project grant and the science is being evaluated and not the person, the funding rates are equal between and we don't identify as male or female, but what CIHR decides are male and female bins. So they're looking at names and pulling people out and running those.
So that must have changed since Holly Whitman's paper then, though, Lara, because it wasn't the same then. Yeah.
Because of that, it's been a lot of work, but CIHR at least has been somewhat sensitive to it. They have tried, and after screaming for 2 years, they were receptive to looking at the data more closely and then killing that particular grant program. But it requires vigilance, and it kind of circles me back to my first part, which was get involved so that you have a voice at these tables and you can scream and yell about grant funding, or sit up in your peer review committee and say, no way, that's not okay. You can't speak like that. That's not accurate, whatever it is. But I think it's really important that we try to get voices at the tables to counter. And Jehannine, I'm very grateful that you do the work you are doing, because it's just critical.
Yeah, I agree.
That thoughtful people are there, regardless of race, gender, all of the other things. It's just thoughtful people.
And just for funsies, Lara and I met years and years ago on the Faculty Association's Status of Women Committee, which was probably around like 2010 or something. And that group was responsible for remedying the gender-based salary gap between men and women faculty at UBC. So
it's reemerged.
I know it has. It does every 5 years, but it was good work when we did it. Ellie, please go ahead.
Hi, Jehannine. Did I freeze for a minute? Firstly, huge thank you to sharing this and putting so much of your personal passion into this. It's incredible. I feel like I kind of snuck into this a bit because obviously it was targeted. I'm white, I'm privileged, I'm not a man, I'm not a professor, and I come from the dark side, which is the funders side. So I'm like, uh-oh, anyway.
No, you're allowed to be here. It's great. I'm glad you're here.
I just wanted to share, because obviously there's a lot of talk about CIHR here, and it's super interesting for us. But I also just wanted to share some things that I see positively in the funding world. I'm not going to talk about CIHR at all, but the work that we do in terms of we really do care about this stuff, and we really do try. And since I joined Health Research BC, I've been sitting in on our peer review panels, and I've seen especially our chairs and SOs calling out people around DORA. We're signatories to DORA. I do see it happening, but it takes a lot of effort and commitment and passion from the team I work with to make that happen, like really prepping the chairs and saying that that's an expectation. So I guess I just want to share, like, I do see change.
Agreed.
I do see things that are positive, and I also see a lot of people in funding of research who want a better, fairer, more equitable research system.
That's right.
And so I just want to share that and acknowledge how challenging it is and how difficult. And I'll give you an example of that. Last year in 2023, we introduced an EDI section in our funding programs and asked people to talk about it. It was our first baby step, and we kept it fairly open, because you can always have unintended consequences as well if you take a really big step. And when we asked the peer reviewers like how they feel about it, generally positive, but we don't have an evaluation score associated with it, because the challenges of scoring the EDI section is incredible. So our first step is, let's try and highlight this, let's try and encourage people, and let's try and bring those conversations to the peer review area as well. But there's also a group of our reviewers who are like, you know, we just want to be able to have a score, and if you don't have a score, it's not meaningful. Anyway, I just want to share that as one of the challenges, an example of a challenge that kind of shows up in the funding process.
Thanks so much for that, Ellie. Yeah, and you know, okay, so as I said, I designed this talk for people who largely, Todd accepted, did not come. So of course what I have to say hits different for those of us that live it, right? And it can end up feeling super depressing, as I warned you right at the beginning. I can't tell you how angry I got when I was preparing this. I can't tell you how like rageful I was. And again, as I said, like this is emotional labor that I'm putting in that is not rewarded, because the people that I designed the talk for are not here. So I am unable. It's a living example of the credibility deficit, how EDI is not an issue for the people who are in power. And so so the point being is that, like, community building. So yes, the people that are here because we are the people that care about this, and but we do have power collectively. We do. And so I don't want people to leave feeling depressed. Yes, it's angry making, but look around you, see who's here, and that we all care, we all have voices, and we are doing our bits. You've heard from Ellie, you've heard from Lara, you've heard from Dawn, right? So people are doing their bits. We will change it. It's just difficult, and it will take time. Yeah.